hand it off to Nick. And Nick, I guess just high level, he's a tech evangelist. He's a Microsoft Cloud and Data Center MVP, and he's the founder and chief tech evangelist for Techvangelism. You can check out the website too, techvangelism.com. But Nick, you might have a few other things you might want to add as far as your background. But
sure. I appreciate it, and no worries, you stole my thunder, but I don't mind at all. So you guys honor me by having me talk to me tonight. I do appreciate it. We're talking obviously about insider threats. You've seen this slide up here for the last half an hour, so I think you know what we're talking about. I will take questions at the end, only because at my screen I see this big PowerPoint presentation and an itty-bitty kind of thumbnail of you guys in the room, and I'd rather see you when we're doing a bit of Q&A back and forth. So it's okay, you can hold your questions till the end and sort of write them down or something, that way I can at least see who I'm talking to, try to interact with you as much as I can, and try to make this as close to being me in the room as is humanly possible, if you were. So as was mentioned, I am a Microsoft MVP. About 25 years, actually I'm up to 28 years of enterprise IT experience. I'm assuming by looking at the room, some of you go back as far as I do. So if you care at all, my very first server was a NetWare 22 box running on a 286 non-dedicated mode. That's where I started in IT. Some of you probably go that far back and tell me something even older than that. It's usually where the conversation goes. Someone was yelling, I think it was OS2 last time I did a presentation, and I mentioned that. That's a long time ago. I make my living as a technical evangelist. It means I've taken the culmination of all my experiences. I've done XP, been an enterprise consulting company. I've designed Active Directory and Exchange environments for the likes of Chicago Tribune, Fox News, Carnival Cruise Lines, Brock's Candy, Hummer, the list kind of goes on and on and on. And then also working as a VP of marketing for 3 different tech companies. And I've taken the culmination of all those experiences, and I basically spend most of my time speaking to customers, to partners, to vendor companies, and I help try to figure out what's going on in the industry and help people like you guys kind of see the forest through the trees. Because what I've found over the years is you have your heads down most of the time, working very intently on very strategic initiatives. You don't have time to figure out what's going on in the industry, what should I actually worry about, how do I focus our energy so that we're actually focused on the right thing. And so that's what I kind of spend my time doing, and yes, you can actually make a living doing that. So that's me in a nutshell. We are going to talk about insider threats. The place I thought I'd start first is by talking about some industry stats to sort of reflect what's going on in the industry. Now, anytime I show stats, I always like to sort of preface it by saying I'm not a big fan of fun. So I am not trying to put stats up to go, look, see, it's really bad and you should be scared, and that's not the point. The point is to take really statistically relevant sample size data and use it to sort of reflect what's going on in the industry so that we can get a grasp of what are the trends, how much is this a risk, how much do they need to pay attention to this, and so on. So a couple of the stats. The first one here comes from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. This year you can see that a little under a third of data breaches were committed by insiders. That's actually an increase from last year, which was only, if I was cheating my notes real quick, 28% last year. So it's a slight increase, about 20% from last year. But it does show that insiders are growing and their sort of willingness to do something where they have access to data, wanting to do something and steal it potentially. And by the way, if you're not reading any industry report at all, the one I would tell you to read is the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. If you just look up Verizon, like the cell phone company, and then DBIR, short for Data Breach Investigations Report, if you just Google that, you'll find it instantly. And that comes out about March or April every year. Fantastic read, lots of good data in there, gives you a sense of what's going on from a data breach perspective. So insiders are sort of on the rise. And the other thing that I mentioned about this stat here, even though you go, well, 31% are insiders, man, well then 69% are external. I need to focus on the external attackers. And what I'd actually respectfully submit to you is that number 31% is actually massive, even though it's dwarfed by about half to external attacks, because a lot of external attacks are using automation and opportunistic attacks rather than the 31% reflecting someone who is like literally an individual in your organization who is attempting to break into your organization and steal some data, or not break your organization, steal some data, and maybe exfiltrate it, or cause some data destruction, or whatever the case is, something malicious in intent, maybe commit fraud, that sort of thing. And so think about it that way. The sheer opportunistic nature of automated attacks is going to certainly elevate, balloon that external attack number. But at the same time, the fact that it's only double the insider threat number, that really worries me. Because the optimistic thing should be so much bigger. It should be 10 times bigger, but it's not. It's like twice as big. So a number to really pay attention to. Second number here is, and this comes from 20 months cost of insider threat report, which came out actually last year. Yeah, it hasn't been a new report yet this year, so this is the latest data we have. You can see the average number of incidents, about almost 5 per company. And so the idea is that that's the number of incidents each company has seen, and then just I grabbed a snapshot of a report from, a chart from that report that shows the number of incidents reflected based on the order of head count in the organization. Unfortunately, there is no numbers along that lower axis, so I don't know what that is, but generally the idea is as it gets bigger, they're showing you the numbers they found. Obviously, they had more incidents, but overall, the average number was about 5 incidents per year per organization. And then the last that I've got here reflect around, actually I got 3 more, come to think of it. The average number of days to contain an incident, you can see, is about 2 months or so. This sort of jives with the data breach investigation report number, which is typically, it's the majority of detected data breaches is somewhere in the sort of, it's weeks to months range, meaning it's not 2 weeks, but it's more like it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks. It kind of fits right in this same kind of area where it takes a long time for organizations to figure out that an insider incident has actually happened. According to Accenture's, this is what the cost of cybercrime, the cost of cybercrime report, which came out this year. You can see there's a 15% increase in the overall cost, and then there's a bit of a question in terms of what the actual cost is for insider incidents. And you can see I've got a range here, 1.6 million to 2.9 million. The 1.6 million is the Accenture number. The 2.9 million is the Ponymon number. So I put the range up. And usually whenever I see big numbers like this, some of you work at much smaller companies like 50 people, 25 people. Maybe you work for 500, 1,000, 10,000. But the idea here is, I think if nothing else, even if you go, well, that's not my company's number, at least take away, it costs something. It isn't going to be a material cost per incident. If you were to average this out, you would take the 1.6 and divide by 5, something like $300,000 an incident on the low end. And again, 2.9 million, I'm rounding up to 3, divided by 5, calling it $600,000 on the high end. So that's the cost per incident based on what's going on insider threat. So the big thing here, that first number on the left, they're on the rise in terms of being responsible for a portion of data breaches. And then you're seeing 5 incidents per year, and there's some material costs that are associated with that. Now, the real challenge here is trying to find an insider threat in the first place. And the question is, why is it actually a challenge in the first place? If you take a look at the slide here, I'll put up a couple of reasons here. The first thing is that the fact that it's an insider threat type of event is all about this last word of the first bullet here, intent. The idea here being that you're really trying to figure out, is someone doing something because they have malicious intent, or because they have the company's best interest at heart? And I'll give you an example. I used to work as a VP of marketing for a company that did insider threat detection. And we had a customer that actually had some data stolen from them. It was basically something as simple as some sales data copied to a USB stick. And the question was, well, is that action an insider threat? So I'd ask you guys, to answer this rhetorically speaking, if someone copies, let's say, 50 files to a USB stick, is that good or is that bad? And the answer, of course, is, I don't know. It's about what are they trying to do with it. And so in essence, you have to know what happened sort of before, during, and after the event in question to figure out that intent. Kind of putting that in a practical example, if we were somehow able to rewind the clock, so to speak, and find out that before they did that copying with their boss said, hey, I'm going to New York tomorrow, and I've got to get all the sales data to take with me, and I'm only taking my iPad, so could you copy that to a USB stick for me, please? Well, then you know what the intent is. The intent is they're just doing their job for their boss. But if you were to somehow able to roll the clock forward after the event instead, let's take a different scenario, same issue, someone copies 50 files to a USB stick, but not one where the boss is asking for it. You were to look after the event, and you were somehow able to see that the user was, let's say, chatting with somebody on, I don't know, Google Hangouts or some kind of, even Facebook chat, doesn't matter, something. And basically the conversation goes something like, I got the goods. You bring the bag of cash and meet me behind, 7-Eleven at 11 o'clock tonight. Well, then it's bad, right? And that's the idea here. It's about intent. And so we've really got to figure that out. That's why spotting the insider threat is really a challenge for most organizations. Now, the action can be something that's out of the ordinary, like that example of the USB stick and the 50 files copy, because that's something the user doesn't normally do. But it can also be something that is very much part of their job, and I'll give you an example that kind of gives you some nuance here. I had another customer that had figured out that someone was committing fraud, and what they were doing is they were issuing checks themselves inside the AP system, so it works for account payable at the company. And the way that they figured out it was them was, first off, what they were doing is they were just cutting checks, but to themselves or to someone they knew. Now that looks like something that's just not out of the ordinary, right? Because it's their job, they cut checks all the time. Now what was out of the ordinary for them, and what actually got them caught, was the person was having sort of second thoughts to doing it, and was you can almost see them trying to muster up the courage to do this, because what they were doing is they were opening the window to issue a check and closing it, and then opening it again and closing it, and then opening it again and closing it, like a very nervous person just couldn't decide, am I going to do it or am I not going to do it? They're really kind of torn, I don't know, it's the angel and the devil on your shoulder, write the check, don't write the check, I don't know, whatever the case is, and they just couldn't bring themselves to do it. They finally did it, and it was that abnormal, very specific behavior that actually determined that they triggered an alert and figured out they were doing something wrong. So, but other than that, you wouldn't know, because it's just about intent. And so the reality here is that you have to be very proactive in order to have an effective strategy to find an insider, hopefully before they either commit some kind of threatening action, or they commit at least something that has a real material impact on your organization. So the question becomes, how do you identify those that are potentially risky in the organization? Now, the thing to know is that risk in your organization is shifting, and the reason is there's a lot of factors that come into play. I've got a couple here I'm putting up on the slide, and you can see things that these are the different kinds of things that may push someone, let's say, over the edge to then commit some kind of insider threat. You see things like financial hardship, and I'll give you a personal example. Not hardship, but something that could have been for myself, and I've got permission to share this. So my wife has a heart condition, has actually had 2 heart surgeries, and she's only 47. And in 1 year, at the end of the year, we always get that nice little report from the insurance company. It's like, look how much money we saved you because you have our insurance. Aren't we awesome? And we looked at it, and it was over like $200,000 in cost. Now, if you can imagine, if I didn't have good insurance that covered it, because I didn't pay anywhere near $200,000, I would have had to figure out how I'm going to pay those bills. And suddenly I've got this financial hardship. See, that's a shift in my own life. That's something I didn't have that burden before, and now the risk kind of shifts to me, and I'm going, man, how am I going to pay for this thing? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I suddenly say, I'm just going to go myself check. You know what? I'm going to go down to, let's say, the second bullet, personnel issues. I can rationalize a little bit, they keep passing me up for the job for accounts payable director, so screw them, I'm just going to go ahead and cut myself a check and help me pay for that, or whatever the case is. Rumors of things like so-and-so's not getting a job, or we might be, everyone's going to get fired because we got acquired, those kind of things happen as well. Even just perceptions, my boss doesn't like me, things like that, and they can just shift some loyalty where now I'm in it for myself. Now, in 1973, there's a guy by the name of Donald Presley who came up with the concept of something called the fraud triangle, which you can look at, to search fraud triangle and find this. And I think it really applies to insider threats. It was about fraud, but it was basically 3 things. So there's a triangle, what need to be kind of all in cahoots with one another and aligned for someone to commit fraud. And I memorized it by using kind of the acronym, sort of the word more. As if like the person wants more, and that's where they're going to commit an insider action of some kind, but without the E's. There's only 3 parts. So the M is motivation. So there's some significant motivation enough to want to commit some kind of bad action that is benefits themselves. So like in my example, it might have been, I've now got a $200,000 health bill that I've got to pay. Now I'm significantly motivated to try to figure out how am I going to come up with that money. The second one is the O in more, and that is opportunity. And so in this case, it's the person has the opportunity because, let's go back to the accounts payable clerk example, and they have the opportunity to write themselves checks, or they have access to data that's sensitive, like intellectual property, they can take it with them and sell it to a competitor, or something along those lines. And the last one, the R, is rationale. And that goes back to that, I kind of even uttered something that I said I was rationalizing the whole, like, well, I can't pass me up for jobs, so I deserve this. And I've actually read stories that there was a story about someone who was the head of IT at, I'm going to say the name of it, Sotheby's. It's that auction house in the UK. And the person head of IT kept getting passed up for promotions and things like that, and wasn't getting raises. And they end up stealing diamonds. This is probably 7, 8, 9 years ago. But stole a bunch of diamonds that they were going to auction off. And she rationalized, because I wasn't making what I should be making, so I deserve this. And it's that rationalization. So when those three things come together, and we try to create that triangle, that's when that risk becomes focused on that particular individual. And the idea is that it's always shifting, kind of coming back full circle to the first bullet on the slide, where someone may not be in that predicament today, but they may be tomorrow. It's the people that you think are risky just because of, let's say, because of what they have access to. They might be the person you have to worry about. It might be the person that suddenly has a personal issue at home that maybe only HR would know about because they found out, hey, we get better health insurance because all this stuff is killing me and I'm having to pay all these bills and I know my wife's still gonna have problems or whatever. That could be an indicator of risk even right there. So be thinking that risk is always shifting, and these are some of the reasons why here on the screen. Now, there's actually a report done by the Cybersecurity Insiders this year, Insider Report 2019, and these are the percentages that most organizations are concerned about in terms of their position. And you see that about half is regular employees, but you see that number right in the middle. Who's that? That's you guys. They're worried about you, just like anybody else. And owners of organizations should be worried about you, just like anybody else, because risk can shift to you. You know, my job could have been an IT person at the time, and then I had those bills. And then you, of course, see the normal things, contractor service providers, and so on. But these are the top three. And even IT is right in there. Privileged users, I always like to extend to anybody that has privilege to any kind of access to anything that's sensitive, it's valuable externally, can be used against the organization, hurt the organization financially, anything along those lines you can think about privilege. But IT admins, you guys, I'm sort of grouping you in that, even in your title, you're in there as well. So you guys are a part of that. So you have to define some risk levels in order to figure out where you put your focus, because you have lots of focus. Every employee potentially is a risk. And the way that you're going to do that is I'm going to show you how to create risk levels in a moment, but you're first going to assign risk based on a couple of things. The first one is the position or the role, sort of the obvious thing. If someone is, let's say, in finance, they're a risk because they have access to money. Right? If someone is in, let's say, product development, they have access to intellectual property, you know because of their role that they have risk, they present risk to the organization. So the role is one thing. The second one is just the department they work in. And that could be my same example of saying somebody's in finance or someone's in product development, but the specific roles is really probably the better issue in the first bullet. Someone is the CFO, someone is the head of product development, but then also anybody in the department may also present a risk as well. And then the last one is just an individual. They have some weird one-offs where founder of the company has access to everything and that kind of thing, where there isn't a particular role, but they have access to everything, so that individual comes into play. And the idea is you're going to end up wanting to create some kind of risk score. The example here at the bottom right is showing a risk score of 1 to 10. And as I walk through the next couple of slides, and I walk through how you can assess a risk, do risk assessments and create risk scores, it doesn't have to be 1 to 10. It could be 1 to 3. It could be A through F. It could be, good, bad. It's up to you. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just showing you something that's 1 to 10 as an example. But the idea is you're going to assign some kind of risk level to individuals in the organization. And then you're going to come up and try to group those into something simpler. Because that's something simpler, like I'm using low, medium, and high, and again, it doesn't have to be good, bad, good, red, green, whatever you want. But coming up with groupings and putting them together is going to help then dictate what kinds of security precautions, what kind of policies, what kind of monitoring you're going to do, and you're going to group it based off of these because you're going to try and simplify this down. You're not going to have 10 different levels of monitoring, probably. That's way too much, but you might have 3. You might have 3 kinds of policies you might have in place, or 3 levels of assessment you might do, or risk reviews or something based on this. So you're going to try and come up with risk scores on the left, come and simplify that into groupings, and then from those groupings associate what kind of technology that you're going to apply. Now, This is an example of a risk assessment document that I did for a customer. And I want to first kind of point out the areas that I'm using so that you kind of get a sense of what you might want to do. If you decide you want to take a picture of this, wait until I show you the one that's populated, just because this isn't going to help you. But I'll show you one that's fully populated here, and that's sort of the money shot. Typically when I show this, people are trying to take pictures of this, so if you want to just wait, because that's the good one. But a couple things here is you start with things like objective questions, things that are very clear-cut, like that they have access to this kind of data. It's yes or no. It's not subjective. Do they present a risk objectively, or do they not present a risk objectively? There should also be some subjective questions. Things like, how much would this hurt this company? And I want to show you some examples here in a moment. And that's sort of subjective, like if someone stole some data, would we really be hurt or not? And if we would be, how badly? That kind of thing, where you're kind of going, it really depends on the individual and what they have access to, and so on. So you probably should have some objective aspects of the risk assessment and some subjective as well. The answers, of course, and then some kind of what I call a positional risk score, meaning let's take the answer to the question and give it a score. Again, I'm doing 1 through 10, but you might do 1 through 3, 1 through 5, A through F, whatever you want. But you come up with something that defines a score, and then some way of figuring out either adding them all up. I'm choosing to average them, just as an example. You might add them all up. You might have 10 things, and you go, we're going to equally weight them. We'll just do the 1 through 10, and we'll come up with a highest score of 100. 100 is a really bad risk score, and some really low, like 10 is a really good risk score. It means they're not very risky. It's up to you. Now, just to show you some examples here. Objective questions. Does the position require access to any of the following information? You can see the different kinds of sensitive information. You would obviously tailor this to your organization in what kind of data you have. Does the position have access to data above without supervision? Like, do they work without anybody coming by? They can access it. It doesn't require any kind of notification that they're accessing this data. There's no audit trail, maybe anything like that. Does someone have to approve a request? Anything like that. If those things are all in place, then maybe the answer is no to this. But if they just freely access some data without anyone knowing, that's a problem. Can they do this stuff without supervision, without accountability, like exporting or emailing via the web or printing? And that's usually about our restrictions in place for this particular role or person, as the case would be. Do they work remotely? Which ties back to the idea of without supervision. Can they just do this from a coffee shop or something like that? And does this person require signing a non-compete or a non-solicitation clause? That's something that's really good. It's somewhat subjective as to whether or not signing that means that they present a risk, but it's certainly not objective. It is objective whether or not they do or don't have to sign something like that. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. If like a salesperson has a non-solicitation and a non-compete, then we probably don't want them taking the sales records with them, because that would hurt the company. That kind of thing is where we're going with that. Subjective. You went to a competitor with data. How much would that impact the company? Subjective. How much would you fear how much that would hurt? If the physician had their laptop stolen, how much would that negatively impact the company? That's more about negligence than it is maliciousness, but kind of keep that in mind. If they sold data, how much would that harm the company? And if they decide to harm the company directly, how much harm could they cause? It's just all kinds of based on what you think. And so here's kind of the money shot of something filled in so you can see what it might look like. And in this case, I'm saying in the first question, they've got some credit card data, they got vendor lists, I'm giving them because they have credit card data access. There's a risk score maybe because that could really harm the company in a subjective way, kind of thinking about it. And you kind of add that up, and I've assessed them down to a 4. Now, here's the beautiful part about this, and it's also kind of the frustrating part about this. I might look at this answer and go, wait a second, I gave them a rounded answer of 4, but man, they have access to all this credit card data. Maybe I should rethink how I have this calculated. Yeah, and that's the idea. You really have to work through this, and it's not just going to be, come up with a question, assign it a score, and then boom, you're done. You might have to go through and do this for multiple roles, and then you'll sort of realize I should do 2 or 3 or 4 roles. Typically, you end up finding, man, this isn't right. We have to kind of reassess this because I've got this person that definitely is a really high risk, but the way that we have it all structured, they're really not a risk according to this scoring methodology. So you have to kind of come up with something that works based on your organization. So kind of keep that in mind here. Now, once you do come up with something that works, and you've gone through the process of doing risk assessments for roles, for individuals, for different positions, the next thing is to align those scores with specific security controls. I'm going to show you a very basic way to look at it. I decided to go low, medium, and high, as the case would be. And the idea is, with low risk, there's still a risk, like they still have a risk of shifting, but today the low risk might be, they have access to, like read-only access to sales data, but they can't export it, they can't print it, you know, that kind of, they can print it, they can't export it, they can't do screenshots, yeah, that kind of thing. But I still want to keep an eye on them because they're a salesperson that if they took the data with them, they could harm the company, right? That kind of thing. And I actually have a story of someone that I know personally. He used to work with him as a salesperson at one of the tech companies I worked at, and then he was asked to come over to another company they worked at. He sort of felt very entitled, like these are my customers, because he was very relationship-based in his selling. So he decided he was very old school. This is very old school. He print screened every screen. So he didn't even like export out or run a report. No, he just printed it out, then retyped it in at the new company, which just seems mind-boggling. But this is sort of a guy that was very old school in his methodology. So he was still a low risk, but it turned out he was a risk. Even though the controls were in place where he couldn't necessarily do anything, he printed them out anyway. So the idea here is with low risk, I typically recommend to customers utilizing some kind of user behavior analytics. Let me define what that means to me, because there's lots of definitions that are out there in the industry. And by the way, I don't push product ever. That keeps me impartial. I just talk about what kinds of solutions are out there, and you figure out what's good for you. If we're on a one-on-one basis, I'm happy to talk about some things that I've seen and what I like and dislike, but in a general form, I try not to, because I'd rather just be helping you really good information rather than, and buy this product from so-and-so, because that just doesn't really sit well. But user behavior analytics should be something that is watching the behavior of the user, looking for abnormal types of behavior that are leading indicators of potential threats. And I'll go into some very specific examples on the next slide. But in this case, we're not necessarily watching for, let's say, that texting chat that happened where it said, I have the goods, I'll meet you behind the 7-Eleven tonight at 11 o'clock. That's something different. This is more about things like, are they being generally positive towards the company? If they normally print only 3 things, are they still pretty much only printing 3 things a day? They're not suddenly printing 150 things, or they're not trying to copy files more than they normally copy files and they exceed a data threshold, things like that. You're looking for leading indicators that aren't very specific actions in terms of they're copying the such and such database, but it's just they're doing things that look abnormal to them, and it's a leading indicator. So that's for low people. You always want to have something, at least you're watching so that when they do become a high risk, and the risk shifts, you have this watch of time to go, wait a second, they're now printing everything, and they're copying all kinds of stuff all the time, and emailing lots of stuff with huge amounts of attachments that you already are watching, so it's good for low. SIM solution can also be utilized. You can pull log data from different aspects of things like, are they logging on at abnormal times? They never log on Saturday at 3 a.m. Why are they doing it now? That kind of thing. And sometimes some SIM solutions say that the user behavior analytics is fine. I don't think it gives the full picture. I'm a big believer that you should have something that's agent-based on an endpoint, so you really have full visibility to everything the user does. That too has its own problems, because the user can then use maybe their own mobile device, or not use a company-sanctioned computer, and maybe remote in to third-party key or something like that, and then you're not necessarily watching what they're doing on their own endpoint in the office, but you're watching, let's say, it's a Citrix session or something along those lines. So there's some pros and cons to even the way that I like to see it. For meeting users and user activity monitoring, this is where, again, in a perfect Nick world, I want it to be agent-based, and I'm actually watching everything the user does, every keystroke, every window they open, every application, taking screenshots, being able to play it back like a video, and this kind of like a keylogger on steroids. A lot of user activity monitoring solutions sometimes will go the SIM route, and they're simply pulling data from different sources, and that does provide you a pretty decent picture, particularly if you get file access data, you can get network data, you have therefore some idea around web access and things that they're doing that way. You can get log on data as well. You get a decent picture, but you're not necessarily going to get something like that whole Google Hangouts or Facebook chat with the actual dialogue back and forth between the two individuals. So something that's agent-based on the endpoint would actually get stuff like that. And then if it's a high risk, I'd want to add on top of that some real-time alerting. So everybody who's medium and high has user behavior analytics, and SIM solution probably in play. Monitoring, medium and higher is user activity monitoring, and then high is real-time alerting. I want to know as quickly as possible. And real-time, by the way, I should probably do like in air quotes, because there is going to be some latency. There's probably going to be 5 to 50 seconds of latency, depending on what's going on in the network and the different protocols that are used. It depends. So you're not really going to get truly real-time, like, they just copied the 50 files that just happened a second ago. It's more like you might get a minute later, 2 minutes later. So realize that there's some latency there with real-time alerting, near real-time alerting more than anything. Now, there are other kinds of solutions you can put in place here. I'm just trying to paint a picture of some kinds of solutions you might have and how the various levels of risk would align with the various types of security controls you might put in place. Now, there are behavioral indicators that you want to put in place. And there's two kinds, it's what I call leading indicators and active indicators. The leading indicator ones that truly are leading, they're not actually a threatening action in and of themselves yet. That's what an active is. If something that truly seems unusual, inappropriate, it really makes it look like you're either doing something right now or you're just about to do something right now. So leading would be things like shifts in behavior and shifts in communication. And I'll give you an example. Let's say someone starts coming in late every day. Okay? They just didn't like their job much anymore. So that's a shift in behavior. A shift in communication. There's psycholinguistic indicators that the FBI has that came out with literally 10 years ago. And they've been building on it ever since, and it's now utilized by a lot of UBA, UAM solutions for things like, let's say, shifts in tone, from generally positive to generally negative about the organization. That's something that's a leading indicator. They haven't done anything yet. It's like the dumb company always keeps passing me up for jobs, and how come I don't get promoted, and that kind of thing, and it's generally negative in tone. The other psycholinguistic indicator is that of going from lots of we's and us's to lots of I's and me's. So again, if it's, hey, we're going to the Microsoft Ignite show in September, the marketing department's probably going to have everything done, the teams got together, and we were able to blah, blah, blah. It's all sort of about teams and we, and it's about us doing stuff. And then, but you hear my sort of rant that I went on a moment ago. It was like, I getting passed up for promotion. How come I don't get promoted? It's about I, me. And so those kinds of shit can be a leading indicator. And it's all baked into solutions that you'd have to purchase. But those kind of things are leading indicators. And then active indicators are going to be something that's more, they're doing something that looks very suspicious right now. And it either is semi-leading, meaning like that logging on at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. They haven't done anything bad yet, they just logged on really weird. But it also could be something like the copying of files, as the case would be. So these are some examples. And if you're trying to take a snapshot, this is the time to grab it. So the leading indicators, things like personal changes and HR issues. HR is going to be one of your great sources of detail around leading indicators. They're a great source of intel to tell you, so came to me and they're having a problem, or you might want to be putting user behavior analytics on them and watching what's going on with them because they might present a risk to the organization, things like that. If they're looking for a new job, they're just on, whatever it is, Monster or LinkedIn looking for jobs, and you see the word resume come up in emails all the time, things like that. And then I already talked about communications. On the active side, I talked about the logons, the abnormal application use, like my example of the accounts payable person who was opening the window, closing the window, opening the window, closing the window, that kind of thing. The printing, the access, the copying of sensitive data, and again, the communications like the I got the goods, do you have the bag of cash? Those kind of things all indicate either that something has already happened or is about to happen, depending on the activity that's going on. All right, so lots of groundwork laid out in terms of defining risk and what are the indicators that you might be looking for. The last, I don't know, I guess I got about half an hour still, I think, if I have an hour for this whole thing, right? I have an hour, is that right, everyone? I have an hour, including Q&A? You have to speak because I'm looking at a thumbnail of you guys.
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you, that was good. You guys worked at your synchronized answering, I'm very impressed. That was good. All right, so the last 20 minutes or so, I'm gonna talk about building an insider threat program. The simplistic version of the plan, you can see 5 steps here. You got to figure out what the obstacles are. We'll talk about some of those over a couple different slides. You've got to create an insider threat program team. I'm going to give you also a really good reference to an insider threat program maturity model report that I built that'll give you some idea of where organizations are, how to build one, what are some of the obstacles, what are the issues that everyone faces, so you can kind of get a sense of that. Talk about critical documentation and notices, intelligence sources, and then response plans. And so I'm going to talk about these over the next couple of slides. The first thing here is you got to build a program. And the link at the bottom there, and it's a bit.ly slash, and it's 2019 capital ITMM as an insider threat maturity model. That's a report I built with a software vendor that does some of this. And putting aside the vendor, there's not any promotional aspect to them inside other than they're help sponsor it. We built this insider threat program together and came up with these 5 levels you can see: non-existent, reactive, proactive, predictive, and optimized. And these are levels of maturity that exist. I'm going to kind of walk through them really briefly. You can see for the non-existent, basically they have nothing. They don't even really care or recognize that there are insider threats. They don't care if they have to detect them. They're literally unaware, totally just clueless in terms of anything around insider threats. Reactive is more like, I know that someone could do something. You know what? If it happens, we'll figure it out. That's basically reactive. You might have, say a forensics tool that you've purchased, but this is nothing proactive. It's just reactive. If something happens, we'll do something about it. Proactive here, you've got tech in place, you've got communications in place, you've got something that helps spot insiders somewhat proactively. But it's not yet, if you can see the next one, I'm going to use the next one, predictive. It's just proactive. We have something in place, we can at least detect that something's happening, but it's probably more focused on a very core group of users. So think of like a bank that might, let's say a big bank, like a Chase or something like that, where maybe they're focused on just the people that manage, let's say, accounts for people that have $5 million now inside of their portfolio. That kind of just watching those people. So a very, very specific group of individuals would probably fit in the proactive category. Predictive is where you're having formal programs in place, and you can see there are definitions for the program, policies, processes, there's monitoring. It's certainly proactive, and it's more organization-wide in nature. And then the last one here being optimized. This is dynamic and responsive. So think back to, for example, where we went through that sheet to help you figure out what the risk score is for a given role or department or individual. Optimized would have also a formal program in place that says every 6 months, every year, some period of time, we go back and we re-review all of those risk scores and figure out we need to update the assessment, what the scoring is like, and that would be part of just that one aspect would be something that dynamic would be changing over a period of time because the business changes, the risk changes, the data that you have access to changes, the roles might change, and so on. So think of it that way. Definitely take a look at that insider threat maturity model. So the next step here is to figure out what your definitions are. You have to decide what your organization considers an insider threat. Is that someone who's stealing data? Is that someone that is being manipulative? Is it someone that's committing fraud? I mean, usually the answer is like all of those things. There might be, that's fine. But you have to figure out what is your company defined as an insider threat so you can start working towards. Everything's going to underpin that goal of we want to figure out that when this person exists in an organization as proactively as possible, when they exist, so we can do something about it again as proactively as possible. You always want to figure out what assets are of value. This should be sort of data-driven to a degree, meaning where's the data that exists that would be of value that you don't want, or where are the applications, or where is the access of value. So things like if someone can commit fraud by cutting checks inside the accounts payable system, that's the asset that's of value is the accounts payable system, as well as intellectual property and personally identifiable information and credit card details and all those other things that you've heard thrown at you, a million times over. You want to define what the goals are. A couple of examples that I've got here, that I'll put up here. It could be you're trying to figure out when you have potential threats. It could be you're just trying to detect threats when they do happen. It could be you're trying to sort of reactively look at and find inadvertent breaches when there's a lot of them that actually happen where they're technically considered data breaches, but it's something like someone puts a database up on a server. They don't realize that the directory they're putting it in is externally exposed to the internet. Things like that, to be able to detect when those kind of things happen. Maybe identify malicious activity and have a little more context, and then also enhance investigative abilities. If you've got any forensics tools in place, they of course are reactive and they're looking at whatever the state of a system or an environment is, and they're looking at artifacts, trying to figure out what artifacts help give you clues to what transpired. Something like user activity monitoring, user behavior analytics are proactive in nature. They're helping give you and building that information as it occurs so that you have a lot more context and a lot more detail should you want to go back and investigate what happened. So I'm going to go through and start with those definitions and figure what that out is. The next step is building the team, and building the team here, there's a couple of very key stakeholders. The first one is you've got to have senior management buy-in. When you look at that IT maturity model report that I built, one of the key issues is getting executive buy-in. And so this has to be top-down. You can't drive this. If you're assuming all of you are head of IT, somewhere in the IT stack, but you're not the CEO of the organization per se. At least if you're an MSP, not on the client organization anyways. But you've got to get the senior management and get their buy-in. That's absolutely critical here. You've got to get human resources involved and legal, because they're going to be involved. Human resources is always worried about things like employee privacy, especially when it comes to user activity monitoring. We're going to be basically big brothering every employee. Is that okay? Is that not okay? And there's ways to get around that. We can talk about that during Q&A if you're interested in talking about that. Legal needs to be involved because there's going to be documents that'll be involved in this insider threat program that you're going to have employees sign along the way. And then also, just as you're doing everything, like if you want to monitor somebody or you want to have a process of maybe going from watching someone use behavior analytics and switching it over to user activity monitoring, you're going to have legal sign off that it's okay, because they don't want to get sued, or if you do get sued, legal knows the ramifications and that kind of thing. You, of course, have to be involved. Security teams may need to be involved as well. And then the last thing here is, for more mature organizations, typically predictive and higher, there's an insider threat program senior official. Basically, someone's designated as the official owner of the program, as opposed to just being something that is, put together by IT, so to speak. It kind of always falls on us no matter what, but there's actually a designated individual who drives this within the organization. Just sort of depends if it's mature or not. A couple of the essential elements here. I already talked about executive buy-in and support. You've got to have that, and you're going to need to be getting budget from those folks here. You will need communication between departments. I'm going to show you an example of just one scenario that we're building out a response plan for an insider incident, and you're going to see how much communication happens between departments. There's at least, I think, 4 or 5 departments have to be involved just when somebody's getting fired, as an example. And so there's got to be communication in order to facilitate this, because go back to my example of, let's say, HR needed to tell you, I think this person might be a threat. They were complaining to me over and over again in the meeting today that they kept getting passed up for promotions, and I don't understand why. That's the intel that you want, and you want to start watching them right away, because they might present a threat. You want it, that communication's going to be really critical all throughout. You need to have some kind of basis for a risk mitigation framework. There's a number that are out there. NIST has some stuff that's out there. There's a couple of individuals that even provide training to help you build mitigation frameworks. So you want to have some of that in play, and you can look at some industry best practices that are out there, because there is quite a bit out there that you can utilize and kind of steal for free, and I should say use for free, not steal for free. You can use it for free because it's out there in public domain. You have to have visibility into employee behavior. This cannot be something that's just done with like HR and sign some documents and put like a log on there that says, please don't steal anything. I mean, you have to have visibility into everything the employee is doing. That's why I'm a big believer in user activity monitoring and user behavior analytics. I guess that last one's critical to the success of the program. I guess I just wanted to mention that. I forgot why I have that bullet up here. And I would actually also mention here that this is everything that's both online and offline. You're going to be thinking about, you need visibility, and it is critical, but it's critical, you need visibility online and offline, meaning on their computer and not on their computer. That's why computer-based and HR are listed there, so kind of keep that in mind here. The next issue is the issue of documentation and notices, and I might have time. I'm still got a couple more minutes left. Good. I think I'll be right on time here. A couple things you want to do. I want to do background and credit checks. I'm going to guess that it's a bad idea to, let's say, hire someone as a CFO if, let's say, they have a 440 credit score. Maybe, right? That'd be bad. So you'd want to be running credit checks as is appropriate for the role that they're in, doing background checks, again, as is appropriate for the role that they're looking for. You want to have a CIPA in place, confidential intellectual property agreement. It basically should say, typically, both in legalese and in like standard English, so written by the same legal counsel, so that basically says, all of this is considered ours. All these kinds of things, including and not limited to all the intellectual property and HR records and employee information and whatever you want to put in there. This is all ours, and you agree that it is not yours, and you will not take a copy of it with you when you leave. And you will not have copies of it on a drive when you leave. You won't have forwarded it, those kind of things. And you make them sign that the day they get hired. So it's important to understand right off the bat, you're setting the tone. This stuff is ours, not yours. You're not entitled to it. The developer comes in, wants a sign that says in there, anything you code for us is ours. It's not yours. It is never yours. It's never going to be yours. That kind of thing. So they understand legally they've agreed to it before they ever have like an emotional connection to it. Next thing is acceptable use policy. AUP, of what you can and can't do on company computers. And that would be things like you can't send data out of the organization. Of course, simple things like you can't surf, naughty sites on the web or whatever. Those kind of that stuff goes in there too. But from this perspective, you're trying to make sure they understand what is acceptable within the organization in terms of the use of company computers. A security acknowledgement agreement is one that helps you establish that issue of they should have no expectation of privacy while on company resources. Now, I'm going to make this next statement, but I'm going to preface it by saying I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, so you want to seek your own legal counsel, but as a general statement in the United States, no organization, no employee has any reasonable expectation of privacy in the workplace. But to make sure that that is, and there might be some counties or a state or a city, I don't know, that has something to the contrary. But as a general rule, that's the expectation and the established kind of rule of law, if you will. But you want to make sure that that is stated somewhere. Without probably, especially if you're going to do user activity monitoring, you're going to be monitoring their every action. I probably wouldn't say, we're going to be spying on you, and you should know that we're spying. And most organizations don't do that. They let users act normal or native, act in their normal behavior patterns, so that if they're doing something as an insider or something that's threatening to the organization, you're going to catch them doing it, as opposed to saying, we're watching you, so figure out some other way to do it, like just take pictures of the screen with your phone. Then we can't capture that, that kind of thing. So rather than just doing something stupid like copying files to a USB drive or screenshotting or whatever they're going to do, or copying data and pasting it into an email and sending it off. And so that's what this acknowledgement statement is for. Logon banners are there just to kind of keep reinforcing from again, not a lawyer put on TV, but from a legal perspective, you're reinforcing again some of those issues. Legal counsel would the ones to help you state what should be in there in an abbreviated format that helps convey no expectation of personal privacy. You agree to use company computers for company purposes only and not for your own benefit, blah, 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 those kinds of things every time they log on, so that someone can't say, man, I signed that thing 12 years ago, I don't know what it said. You're constantly being informed every single time you log on to the network. So, the intelligence sources, you've got a couple of them here. You've got human resources, we talked about that. Of course, physical security, things like badge scans, that's a good one here. You have user behavior analytics to tell you when someone is doing something that's abnormal, and they're going from a negative to positive to negative, those kinds of things. And you, of course, have user activity monitoring for telling you far more detailed activity details. But this is from the IT program maturity model report. This is what people are using. And so the one that is the predominant one is basic user activity monitoring in most organizations. That's that gray bar. I'm hoping that that's colorblind. If you are, it's third from the bottom. It's the one that's farthest out on almost every single level of the maturity model. The next one, by and large, is OS app and web log data. So it's log data, which kind of ties back to a SIM solution, that sort of thing. That's next. And that's second from the bottom, or pink. Yellow is the next one, which is email archives and e-discovery. Blue is sort of follows after that. That's video surveillance, things like that. So you can see there's a wide range of tools that get used by organizations for intelligence sources here. And then the last thing that I want to cover, and then I'll be happy to take some questions, because I've been doing an awful lot of talking, you haven't had a chance to, is just talking about how to build incident response plans. Now, I always tell people you should be thinking about this as scenarios. In some cases, you can't entirely think of every scenario, but there's some that you really can. And so you can think of things like, if we find a leading indicator, any leading indicator. See there, you don't have to know the exact scenario. You can say, if I find any kind of leading indicator based on, we're watching these 5 things in our solution, let's say UBA solution, and if that happens, what do we do? And the response to that might be as simple as, well, turn the switch, get approval from HR and legal, and flip the switch and start watching them with user activity monitoring. and do a review of their activity after 7 days, or something like that. That might be the whole response. And then if you find something out at that point that they did something really bad or looks malicious, then you can do something else. So you can do all scenario-based. So it could be leading indicators, could be active indicators, could be even something like an employee giving notice, which generally speaking should be a relatively on the up and up kind of scenario, because they're giving you notice and there's 2 weeks. But if they're giving you notice, then that means that they've had some time to think about it, and have your best interest at heart. And they're giving you 2 weeks notice, that's great, but that just gives you really 2 weeks to figure out how they've done anything prior to giving notice. And then the last one here is an employee being terminated. So I'm going to show you an example of, this is what we're calling an involuntary terminations. And if you look at this, prior to the involuntary termination, to start there, we'll kind of walk through this chart with you. We have the notification of desire to terminate. The responsible role is the manager of the person and whatever department they're in. They have to talk to HR. Remember that communication between departments? Got to let HR know. HR has the next job. They have to notify IT, hey, I'm going to be firing somebody, and the last day is whatever the day is. Maybe it's today. Maybe we're doing it on Thursday. And today's, whatever. Today's Tuesday. Yeah, maybe we're doing Thursday, 2 days from now. But the SLA, the response time, should be relatively immediate if you let IT know, because then IT has to talk to security. I think I have security and IT kind of in the same cahoots here in my thinking when I built this. But you could act what I'm calling a plus or minus 30-day activity review. If you have user activity monitoring in place, you're going to look the last 30 days back before you decide to fire them. If you don't, you're going to start watching them now. Because you think about it, if you've ever been fired, I've been fired once in my career. But at some point before you actually being told you're fired, you've probably had some kind of idea that you were being fired. And so that's the time at least you have some kind of inkling, you get a sense of what the person's doing when they kind of grasp, no one's talking to me, no one's sending me reports, how come I'm being asked to return anything? That's just, am I getting canned? That kind of thing. At least you're watching during that period. And then you see things like notification of any inappropriate activity. That goes from security to HR and legal. And then they may say, oh, we found they did something, we can pull them in right now, or whatever the case is. But let's say that they don't find anything bad, still the day of involuntary termination, this is when like the SEPA comes back in place, things like that. The HR and the manager are both going to notify the employee they're being terminated. HR has to review the SEPA agreement to push it back to them, saying, see this thing that you signed when you came here? We're holding you to it. You signed this. We already have a legal document. You agreed to all that. Look, here's it back in regular English. Remember, legalese and English, it's good to do both. You agreed to all this kind of data is ours. It's not yours. You also agree that you're not going to take it with you in any way, shape, or form, or maintain a copy anywhere outside of the organization. And if you do, you have to destroy it. And then you terminate their access. They return company property. You also want to get a certificate of return to destruction. The CRD is there to basically say either I gave you everything back or I no longer have a copy. And again, you can see how there's some communication there between some of the departments in some cases to make sure that those things get signed. So this is an example of a response plan just for that particular insider threat. I think I'm lacking a question slide, but that kind of concludes my presentation. So I'll definitely take questions. So I'm gonna, leave up actually one of my first slides, because I had this at the beginning. I've got to go back. I have my LinkedIn QR code on this slide here. If you just take your LinkedIn app, if you want to connect with me, because I post content on LinkedIn mostly that if I'm creating or speaking somewhere or I wrote something new or whatever, you go to your LinkedIn app and you click on the little, looks like 4 little windows next to the search box. It'll bring up your camera, you can take a picture of that, I'll take you right to my LinkedIn profile, I'll be happy to connect with you. And so while we're doing that, if you guys have questions, I'll be happy to take questions, and we've still got, it looks like, 9 minutes left.
Hey, Nick, can you hear me? Okay. We've got a couple questions, so I'm just going to pass around the mic, but Gary's got a question for you, so I'm going to hand over the mic.
Seems like sorry, I have to.
Oh, I hit a button.
Oh, hold on 1 second here, Nick.
Someone had to, because he couldn't.
Okay, we can walk up there.
The speaker is talking to the microphone.
I can hear you.
He can hear us.
Okay, we can't hear you.
Yeah, he can hear us, but you gotta put it right to the.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll have to people come up then. 1 second here, Nick.
Sorry.
We'll just have them talk like anyway. There you go. Okay.
Seems like a heat map if you put a heat map or a thermal image on a person that you can see when, you know, like people sweat when they got playing poker or whatever, would be a good way of detecting whether they're cheating or not.
Maybe cheating, yes, and especially in the case of poker, I do play Texas Hold'em, so I know exactly what you mean. In the case of the business, that'd be something that's obviously a very small window of time. You're feeling very nervous about something they did, and the trick there is not necessarily going to be certain what it is that they did that they feel nervous about. So these other solutions definitely help.
But it could be a 24/7 monitoring, or 8-hour day monitoring, and just trigger a recording when they're sweating, and then you can tie their activity to what they're doing when they were sweating or whatever.
I suppose that would involve a lot more hardware than I think most organizations want to use. But if you remember the old, it's some old ancient tribal kind of thing where they're going to figure out if someone's innocent or guilty. Is if they basically were to take a hot poker and they put it against their tongue. If their tongue was burnt, then they were guilty. If their tongue was not burnt, they were innocent. And the idea was if they knew that they were guilty, they got really nervous and they got dry mouth, and so their tongue was very dry and burned. But if they weren't guilty, they knew they weren't guilty. They weren't worried about it. It wasn't going to burn their tongue. And it actually just it's like the whole idea of touching something really hot really fast. The saliva in this case evaporate very quickly. So I get what you're saying, but most organizations are probably going to look at something that's more data driven than that.
Well, then my second question to that is invasion of privacy if you're monitoring their sweating or not, their heat map.
You mean if you're watching their activity?
Well, you're watching their body language by monitoring, a heat map of them, if you will.
I wouldn't even know how to respond to that. I haven't met an organization yet that's doing it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but most organizations are trying to get more details. They understand the nature of the threat as opposed to, truth be told, someone could just be really sweaty all the time, right? And so I don't know if that's a really good leading indicator. The psycholinguistic indicators have proven it. So I haven't met an organization yet that's doing it that way. Is your organization doing it that way?
No, not at all. But one of the things is a person normally sweats. That's just a baseline activity. So you got a normal thermal map, and you've got a abnormal thermal map, and then also you could detect people with coming to work with the flu.
I guess you'd have to have thermal cameras and somehow associate that with the individual. That'd be a little cumbersome. I think the digital stuff tends to be a little bit easier to implement.
Thanks, Gary. Interesting questions, observations. It might be easier if anybody has a question, if they wanted to say it, that I can repeat it to them as well. Anybody else have any other kind of input or questions that they want to share? Nick, I've got one question for you. It does seem some of the things you covered, there are like mandates, it seems like, in certain verticals where some of these things are being required from a compliance standpoint. Is that kind of trending right now? Is there more of a need for some of this and actually even a requirement? Whether it's on company or
I'm not seeing requirements specifically to address insider threats, but in some ways they are being addressed. I'll give you an example. GDPR, General Data Protection Rule, is very big on establishing what the process is supposed to look like, who the people are supposed to be able to access the data. You need to be able to tell if there's something wrong with the process, something abnormal happens. And so in essence, if you think about, I'm sort of making up a scenario here, let's say that there's a set of data and 3 people are supposed to access it. How are you supposed to know if another person does or doesn't? Or if the 3 people that are accessing it do something inappropriate with it? And so while they're not cluing in specifically on insider threats, the idea is that they are cluing in on the fact that human behavior is one of the issues here, and trying to make sure that whatever process is in place is actually being followed. And so that smells of behavior, and if we're talking about behavior, then we are talking about the individual as an insider. And the other thing I think I just mentioned here, Carbon Black put out the Global Threat Report beginning of this year. 60% of all external attacks involve lateral movement. That means someone's moving from machine to machine within your organization, which indicates that eventually the bad guy must look like one of the good guys, because they're going to need to leverage internal credentials in order to laterally move within the organization. So by the same token, thinking about whether it's an insider threat or if you're just really trying to figure out its anomalous behavior by an external attacker, the end result ends up being kind of the same in terms of we need to watch and monitor for abnormal behavior so we can figure out, is something wrong? Maybe it's not Joe who's logged on at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. Maybe Joe's account has been compromised and someone is now logging in externally, or something along those lines as well. So kind of a wide range of detail to provide an answer for, but I hope it helps.
One behavioral monitoring that I had back in the late 70s on an interview. I interviewed with a psychologist or a psychiatry guy or whatever, and I had to sit in a rocking chair that was more than twice the size of a normal one. My feet wouldn't hit the ground. I had, my arms are up if I wanted to use, and I lost the job because the results was I was too honest and something else,
Based on rocking in a chair, okay.
Well, I mean, based on the interview, but
got it.
the guy looked
Wow.
a little bit like Woody Allen, and it's kind of funny sitting in a big rocking chair, and of course you have to play the game because you're trying to do the job, so it's...
Understood.
Any other questions or comments? Well, Nick, I think we kind of picked something, we all learned something from your presentation, and appreciate you presenting the group.
Thank you very much.